G'day, I'm Mark from Self Sufficient Me, bringing you another how to grow a ton of video. But this time, it's how to prune a ton of fruit trees. In this video, I want to show you my 10 top tips on how to prune a ton of fruit trees so that they can grow better and produce a ton of fruit. Here on our small 3-acre property, we have over 150 different types of fruit trees. I understand there are specialist pruning techniques for every different fruit tree and probably a book by some professional written on every one of them. But over the years, I've developed a less complicated approach that has given us superior results. Let's get into it. Tip number 1, gear. No matter which way you cut it, slice it or dice it, pruning a ton of fruit trees is hard yakka, but the right gear helps considerably. I like this Ryobi handsaw. Not sponsored, I just rate it. Really good to cut with. And also secateurs. Don't forget a chainsaw if needed for larger trees and a mulcher for later. They're my main tools. Make sure the tools are sharp. That makes for a good cut with less effort and clean. You may need to disinfect tools between trees, especially if you're pruning diseased trees that could be spread. Use gloves. I don't always, but doing a lot of cutting, gloves will save your hands. And of course, eye and ear protection if using high velocity tools like a chainsaw or particularly spiky plants. Tip number 2, speed. If you have a lot of fruit trees like me, and you have a lot of other commitments in life, then you don't want to spend days and weeks pruning fruit trees. I don't have the time to be the Michelangelo of fruit tree pruning to get them all perfect. So I'm not overly sentimental when assessing a tree. And if I make an error, well, it'll grow back fast enough. Healthy fruit trees recover quickly from pruning, so don't mull over it, just get it done. Tip number 3, manageable height. What do I mean by manageable height? Well, in a backyard, you don't want your fruit trees so large that you can't reach the produce. There are some exceptions, such as mulberries, where the weeping branches can provide more berries for us whilst the birds get the ones on top, or a certain feature tree, perhaps grown to shade a picnic area, for example. Generally, I like to keep ours at arm's reach height, or at least a step ladder height, because this makes harvesting easier, gives more room for more trees, and allows even distribution of sunlight, especially if you have a large tree that isn't producing well, such as our Helena olives. Why keep them big when all they're doing is shading out other more productive trees? Tip number 4, crossing dead or diseased branches. Get rid of any crossing or dead or diseased branches from the trees. Crossing over branches can cause abrasions and introduce disease. It also, the clutter makes it too humid and reduces airflow, and that also can introduce disease. So prune them out and your tree will grow back stronger, it will stimulate new growth, and it will love you for it. One of the key benefits of pruning is it spurs on new healthy and bushy growth, which means more fruit. And vertical cuts help prevent disease or rot caused by water pooling on the cut site. Tip number 5, low-hanging branches. Remove branches that are too low, because when the fruit sets, the weight will let the fruit touch the soil, and once the fruit touches the soil, rot will set and the animals can also get. Also, removing low branches makes it easier to work around the tree or mow around it. Tip number 6, shape. I prune most of our fruit trees to the shape of a wine glass, roughly. It's really a bush with a long stem on it. I don't try to be too formative because I grow our fruit trees for food, not to look real pretty. This shape creates an ideal natural framework for most trees. Of course, you might want to espalier a tree, cordon it, or train it differently. That's fine. Gardening books and pros will say to look for outside facing buds and potential new growth and prune accordingly to ensure the new limbs will grow in the direction you want, and that's fine, but don't get obsessed with it because it wastes time, and you can always prune unwanted subsequent growth next time to shape the tree how you really want it. Tip number 7, let them grow. Let them grow and establish first. Never over prune young trees. I do prune young trees just to shape them, so I might remove the lower branches so that it develops a good long stem on it, and then to the shape that I want. But too much interference can hurt the tree because it's still trying to establish a strong root system. Therefore, don't over prune the top canopy, especially of young trees, as this can reduce its capacity to gather enough energy through the foliage to establish itself. Remember, a tree grows below ground also, and the first several years of a tree's life is dedicated to maturing both the canopy and the root system. I often let our young fruit trees grow past their manageable size, so that later, when we do prune them, they bounce back stronger and better than ever. Tip number 8, when to prune. Try and prune your fruit trees when they are dormant or not actively growing. For most climates, this means winter, or at least in spring, just before they start getting their new sprouts of growth. Here in the subtropics, it's slightly different. I like to prune most of our trees at the same time for convenience, but our citrus fruit ripens through winter. Therefore, I tend to wait right on spring and prune them just before flowering along with the rest of the orchard. Don't heavily prune fruit trees when they are actively growing or in summer, as this makes the tree suffer unnecessarily. Some trees can bleed out too much sap, and overall it can hinder a tree's ability to cope with the elements, particularly if it's hot and dry, like it is here. As a side note, removing fruit from a young tree is generally seen to be a good thing, so the tree can put energy into growing rather than fruit production. Having said that, through my observations, a small tree that's a few years old with 2 or 3 fruit forming on it can be left there. Leave it grow on, ripen up, and have a taste test. It shouldn't hurt the tree, don't feel too guilty about it. Tip number 9, sucker growth. The exception of when to prune is whenever you see sucker growth. If you see sucker growth, prune it off at any time of year. Sucker growth is growth that comes from below the grafted part of the tree. In other words, it's growth from the rootstock, and it needs to be stopped because if left to grow, it will grow fast and suck the life out of the tree. What happens is the sucker growth takes over the tree completely if it isn't kept in check. For some trees, you might see sucker growth come back regularly, but be persistent, and eventually, as the grafted plant grows stronger, the sucker growth will be less. Tip number 10, the final tip, mulch. If you're a regular on my channel, you'd know how crazy I am about using mulch. It's like gold dust to me. Put back what you take out by chipping up the prune debris and using it as mulch under the trees or in your vegetable garden. Another reason why I generally do all our pruning at once is so that when I hire a nice big beast of a chipper, I can get it all done and save money that way. So my 10 top tips were gear, speed, manageable height, crossing dead or diseased branches, low hanging branches, shape, let them grow, when to prune, sucker growth, and mulch the prunings. Do all those things right, and your fruit trees will thrive like mine. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it. If you did, give it a big green thumbs up and subscribe. Do you have any pruning tips or comments you'd like to make? Write them down below so that we can all read them and benefit from them. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye for now.